You noticed it, you just didn't know why. Your iPhone felt slower. Apps took longer to open. The camera stuttered. You figured it was getting old. You figured it was time for an upgrade. That's exactly what Apple was counting on. Because in January 2017, Apple quietly pushed a software update to hundreds of millions of iPhones. The update didn't come with a warning. It didn't come with an explanation. It was buried inside a routine iOS release with a single line about power management improvements. And inside that update was a piece of code that was secretly throttling your iPhone's processor, making it run slower than the day you bought it. It took almost a full year for anyone to notice. And when they did, the response was immediate and worldwide. Lawsuits flooded in from 44 countries. Governments launched investigations. And Apple, the $3 trillion company that once told you it existed to put a dent in the universe, was forced to write a check. A $500 million check to the customers it had betrayed. But here's the part that should make your blood boil. Apple's revenue grew 15.8% the year the scandal broke. Their stock kept climbing, and 100 million people were eligible for compensation, but only 3.3 million ever came forward to claim it. The other 97 million never knew what had been done to their device. This is the story of how the most trusted technology company on earth ran a secret program inside your pocket, and how a single Reddit post blew the whole thing wide open. But to understand how Apple got here, we need to go back to the beginning. Because what made Apple great is exactly what they betrayed. The year is 2007, San Francisco, the Moscone Center. Steve Jobs walks onto the stage in his black turtleneck and jeans and says 5 words that will change everything. Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone. What he revealed that morning wasn't just a product, it was a philosophy. The iPhone was the cleanest, most honest piece of technology the world had ever seen. No hidden menus, no carrier bloatware, no settings buried 6 layers deep. Just a single button, a glass screen, and a promise that technology should work for the person holding it, not against them. The first iPhone sold 1 million units in 74 days. By 2011, the year Jobs died, Apple had sold 100 million iPhones. By 2017, that number would pass 1.2 billion. Over 2.3 billion iPhones have been sold in total, making it the best-selling consumer product in human history. But building the best-selling product in human history comes with a problem. Several of them, actually. And by 2016, Apple was staring at 3 massive ones. Problem number 1, batteries age, and Apple had made it impossible for you to replace yours. Every lithium-ion battery on the planet degrades over time. After 500 charge cycles, roughly 2 years of daily use, a battery typically drops to 80% of its original capacity. That's just chemistry. It's unavoidable. But most phone makers had a simple solution, a replaceable battery. If your battery died, you swapped it out and carried on. Apple made that impossible. Starting with the iPhone 4 in 2010, they sealed the battery inside the device. To get it replaced, you had to book an appointment at an Apple store, wait days, and pay anywhere from $49 to $69. Apple called it a design decision. Critics called it a cash machine because every degraded battery was another reason to buy a new phone. Problem number 2, older iPhones were shutting down without warning. By 2016, iPhones with aging batteries were experiencing something deeply embarrassing: sudden, unexpected shutdowns, not at 0% battery, not even at 10%. Phones were dying at 30%, at 40%, sometimes higher. Users were losing calls, missing photos. A surge of complaints flooded into Apple support. The cause was the battery. An aging lithium-ion cell can't deliver the sudden spikes of power that the processor demands during intense tasks. When the voltage drops too fast, the phone's protection circuitry kicks in and shuts the whole device down. Apple faced a hardware problem that was starting to become a public relations problem. Problem number 3, Apple had a new iPhone to sell. In September 2017, Apple was about to unveil the iPhone X. It was their most ambitious device ever, a $1,000 phone with an edge-to-edge screen and no home button. It was a massive bet, and to make it pay off, they needed customers to upgrade. But if your iPhone 6 or iPhone 7 was running fine, you had no reason to spend $1,000. Apple needed a reason, and quietly behind closed doors, they built one. The person who broke open the biggest scandal in Apple's history wasn't a journalist, it wasn't a senator, it wasn't a whistleblower with a briefcase full of documents. It was a Reddit user named TechFire. In mid-December 2017, TechFire posted to the iPhone subreddit with a simple observation. His iPhone 6S had been running slowly for weeks. Frustrating, but not unusual. Then he replaced the battery and benchmarked the phone before and after. Before the replacement, the single-core performance score was 1,466. After the fresh battery, it jumped to 2,526, nearly double, on the exact same hardware, on the exact same software. The only change was a $29 battery. The post exploded, over 500 comments in hours. Thousands of users reporting the same thing. It wasn't old hardware that was slowing down their iPhones, it was something Apple had put there. That post landed on the desk of John Poole, the founder of Geekbench, a respected benchmarking company used by developers and engineers worldwide. Poole spent the next several days pulling real performance data from millions of Geekbench scores across different iPhone models and different versions of iOS. And what he found on December 18, 2017 was damning. On iOS 10.2.0, before the update, iPhone 6s performance scores were clustered tightly around the device's rated speed. Clean, consistent, expected. On iOS 10.2.1, after the update, the scores split. Most phones were still fast, but a growing percentage of devices had been quietly pushed into a slower lane. No warning, no notification, no setting to turn it off. Apple had created what Poole called a third, unexpected state. A hidden performance mode that users didn't know existed and hadn't consented to. The data was irrefutable. Apple had changed how your iPhone ran and told you absolutely nothing about it. The tech press moved instantly. McRumors, 9 to 5, Mac, The Verge. Within 48 hours, the story was everywhere. Governments in France, Italy, and South Korea opened formal investigations. Senators in the United States began drafting letters to Tim Cook. And the phrase that would define the next 3 years was born. Batterygate. Apple went quiet for 2 days. Then, on December 20th, they released a single statement. It was 4 sentences, no apology, no explanation of why users weren't told, just a clinical description of how lithium-ion batteries work, and a note that their software update had successfully reduced unexpected shutdowns by 80%. The statement made things worse, because what Apple was really saying between the lines was this: yes, we slowed your phone down. Yes, we did it on purpose. And no, we didn't think you needed to know. For a company that had built its entire identity on the idea that technology should serve its users, a company whose co-founder had called simplicity and honesty the highest forms of product design, the statement was a betrayal dressed up in engineering language, and the world was not going to let it go. 8 days passed. Lawsuits piled in from California, Illinois, New York. A formal investigation launched in France, one of only a few countries in the world where planned obsolescence is explicitly illegal. The pressure was becoming impossible to ignore. On December 28, 2017, 10 days after TechFire's Reddit post changed everything, Apple published a formal letter on their website. It was titled, "A Message to Our Customers About iPhone Batteries and Performance," and it opened with 2 words that Apple almost never says. "We apologize." The letter was careful. Lawyers had clearly been over every sentence. It said Apple had never and would never do anything to intentionally shorten the life of any Apple product or degrade the user experience to drive customer upgrades. It was a legal denial dressed as a human apology, but buried inside it was the most significant admission in Apple's history. They confirmed the throttling was real. They confirmed it had been running inside millions of iPhones for nearly a year without a word to the people carrying those phones in their pockets. As a gesture of goodwill, they cut the price of an out-of-warranty battery replacement from $79 to $29, a $50 discount for being deceived. Most people weren't satisfied. What followed was one of the most widespread legal actions ever taken against a technology company. In February 2020, French consumer authorities concluded their investigation. The verdict: Apple had deliberately deceived its customers. The fine was 25 million euros, roughly $29 million. France's Consumer Protection Agency said the throttling appeared to have the deliberate aim of pushing Apple customers toward purchasing a new model. 1 month later, in March 2020, a California court approved a class action settlement of up to $500 million, the largest consumer technology payout in American history at the time. Every U.S. resident who owned an iPhone 6, 6 Plus, 6S, 6S Plus, SE, 7, or 7 Plus was entitled to at least $25. 100 million people were eligible. Only 3.3 million ever filed a claim. Apple quietly sent checks to the 3.3 million. The other 96.7 million never knew the money existed. Then, in November 2020, 34 U.S. states and the District of Columbia concluded their own separate investigation. Arizona Attorney General Mark Brnovich summarized what they had found in one sentence. Many consumers decided that the only way to get improved performance was to purchase a newer model iPhone from Apple. Apple, of course, fully understood such effects on sales. Apple paid $113 million to close that case. In January 2024, Canadian courts ordered Apple to pay up to $14.4 million Canadian dollars to affected iPhone users in Canada. Cases remain open in the United Kingdom, where lawyers estimate 23.8 million iPhone users may be entitled to compensation. The total legal bill over $650 million across 4 countries and climbing, all while admitting no wrongdoing. All while Tim Cook's compensation for 2017 alone was $12.8 million. All while Apple posted record revenue in the very quarter the scandal broke, collecting billions from customers who bought new iPhones instead of a $29 battery they didn't know they needed. And through all of it, the fines, the lawsuits, the government investigations across 4 continents, Apple's stock kept going up. Because here is the part that should make you stop and think. The scandal barely touched them. Apple's stock didn't crash, it kept going up. In the 12 months after Batterygate broke, Apple's market cap climbed from $800 billion to over $900 billion. The fines were paid, the settlement checks went out, and then Apple went right back to doing what it had always done. They raised iPhone prices, they locked down repairs even further, and for years, they quietly lobbied in more than a dozen states to kill right-to-repair legislation, laws that would have given you the basic right to fix the device you paid over $1,000 to own. Because here is the uncomfortable truth that Batterygate revealed. Apple didn't lose. You just didn't know you were playing. The $500 million settlement sounds massive, but in the same fiscal year, Apple generated $265 billion in revenue. The fine was 0.19% of annual revenue, not a penalty, not a deterrent, a rounding error on a spreadsheet. For context, that is less than Apple earns in a single afternoon. And for the 96.7 million people who were eligible for compensation but never filed a claim, Apple kept every dollar. What happened next tells you everything about how much had actually changed. In 2020, the same year the settlement was approved, Apple launched a software feature called parts pairing. If you replaced your iPhone battery with a non-Apple part, the phone would show a permanent warning message on your screen. Your battery health percentage would disappear. Some features would stop working. It wasn't a safety measure, it was a fence. A digital lock to make sure that even after $650 million in fines and settlements across 4 countries, the only battery Apple wanted in your phone was one you bought from Apple. They spent 5 years lobbying against California's Right to Repair Act. When the law finally passed in October 2023, albeit signed by Governor Gavin Newsom, Apple supported it only after quietly negotiating to keep parts pairing intact. The law passed. Apple's control over your repair remained. That is not a company that learned a lesson. That is a company that learned how to survive one. So what does Batterygate actually show? It comes down to 3 mistakes, and they were all made on purpose. First, Apple chose silence over transparency. The throttling code existed for 11 months before a Reddit post forced them to acknowledge it. They had an explanation: prevent unexpected shutdowns. It was even a reasonable explanation. But they never gave it, because telling you would have meant admitting the battery was the problem. And the battery being the problem meant selling you a battery instead of a new phone. Second, Apple confused loyalty for permission. For years, they had built something rare in business, a customer base that genuinely trusted them. That trust became an assumption. The assumption became arrogant. And arrogance became a secret throttling program running inside the pockets of 1 billion people who had done nothing wrong except trust the company that told them it existed to enrich their lives. Third, and most importantly, Apple proved that in the age of big tech, the fine is part of the business model. Pay the settlement. Change nothing. Keep the profit. Steve Jobs once said that Apple's job was to figure out what customers want before they know they want it. What Batterygate revealed is that somewhere along the way, that mission got quietly rewritten. The new version reads, "Figure out what customers will accept. Then go one step further, because in the end, you noticed your phone was slow. You just didn't know why. And that gap between what Apple knew and what you were allowed to know is exactly where $265 billion a year gets made.